Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you are watching this video lecture. In the earlier session, we discussed about various factors that might lead to market failures, particularly market power, externalities, failure of markets to provide public goods, and information failure or incomplete information. These are the four major reasons for market failure we discussed in the earlier sessions. Now, in the current session, let us continue this discussion with the response to market failures by governments. In other words, we discussed the problems earlier, why the market failures happen, what could be the reasons for market failure. We did the diagnostics earlier. Now we are going to discuss the solution for it. And naturally, who is the doctor here who has to give solution? Government is the doctor. Government has to give solutions for correcting or somehow reducing the impact of market failures. This government intervention into the market failure correction process is covered in chapter 2, unit 3 of Economics for Finance, and here there are various responses by the government to various reasons for market failure. So for each of the reasons there is one response. When there is market power, government will try to minimize market power so that it will prevent market failure. When there are externalities, particularly negative externalities, government will try to correct those externalities. When there are problems with public goods which the market is not providing, government should provide them, like merit goods, and government should prohibit or reduce the utilization of demerit goods. So merit goods and demerit goods will be definitely distinguished and discriminated by the governments through their policies. We cannot say money is money, economy is economy, whatever we sell, it's okay. No, it's not okay. Government will definitely encourage merit goods and it should discourage demerit goods. How it does, we'll see in this unit 3 of chapter 2, Public Finance. And then, as we discussed earlier, there could be possibilities of market failure through incomplete information or information failure, and government will have to take some steps to correct such information failure also. But ultimately, out of all, why the government is doing all this? Ultimately with an objective of equitable distribution among various sections of the people in the society, so that there are no much inequalities, there is no much injustice or unfairness in the society. So government with its powers will have to ensure equitable distribution, and this is the overall purview of this chapter or unit, rather we can say, related to government intervention to correct market failure. Before entering into each of them individually, let us first of all broadly understand what could be the types of government interventions. Broadly, we can classify the government intervention into two categories. There could be direct interventions or there could be indirect interventions. So what are direct interventions? Direct intervention means government itself will behave as a supplier sometimes, or as a purchaser sometimes, or as a buyer. So directly the government itself will buy something, it will procure something. That is a direct intervention by the government. Or sometimes government can act like a supplier of what? Public goods or information. If you take examples for understanding purposes, government is the supplier for polio drops. Throughout the country, polio drops are served free to the small children by government. So government is acting like what? A supplier of a public good, of course, which is a merit good, which is good for the health of the entire society. So that is one of the examples of where the government is acting like a supplier. And if you see the government acting like a buyer, lot of times we see that classic example of that can be the procurement of food grains in India. Lot of state governments particularly, or even Food Corporation of India sometimes procures food grains from the farmers directly. In other words, the government purchases the food grains from the farmers directly. So what the government is doing there, it is not leaving the food grains to the market. So it is intervening into the market by acting like a direct buyer. That is an example of government acting like a buyer. Same way, government being a supplier, lot of times we see, whether it is transport facilities like railways or some of the medical vaccinations like polio drops, government is the supplier of certain public goods to the people of the country directly, particularly when you say India as an example. So that is direct intervention by the government. But that is not the only kind of intervention by the government. Government can intervene indirectly also. Like what? Government can levy higher taxes, or it can give subsidies also to alter the costs. So ultimately, whatever the final price that is paid by the consumer can be increased or decreased through what? Taxes or subsidies. Once again, if you take example of tobacco products or alcohol products, government will levy higher taxes. Why? It wants to keep the prices of those products high, so that it is not so easily and available to the people and not affordable by many people. So that is how it alters the cost of certain commodities. Naturally, when we say goods which are not merit goods, or we can call them demerit goods. So simply speaking, for demerit goods, government will try to levy higher taxes. For merit goods, government will try to give subsidies. Classic examples of that can be in the form of solar energy equipments, government give a lot of subsidies, or even alternative energy devices, government gives subsidies. LED bulbs, you see LED bulbs are supplied by the government at a very lower price throughout India, and this happened over the past 5 to 7 years, and that has helped the overall consumption of electricity by a very good amount. So government gives subsidies to reduce the cost. Otherwise the LED bulbs were very costly. Normal people could not afford them. So there were cases where the government has given LED bulbs to the people for 10 rupees, whereas the original cost of that could be somewhere around 80 rupees or 100 rupees. So who is bearing the remaining burden? That is government which is bearing. And why is it doing? Because it is a merit good that will have positive externalities on the society. So that government encourages such goods by giving subsidies. Same way, government can give subsidies to e-vehicles, e-rickshaws, or even nowadays recently even electric cars. If anybody purchases, government is directly giving some subsidies. Electric two-wheeler also, bikes also are eligible for government subsidies. Why government is doing that? To encourage such merit goods, so that negative externalities like pollution can be reduced. That is the reason for it. So like this, government can intervene into the market indirectly, though it is not giving freely. It might give some subsidy, or it might levy taxes also. Both ways it can act, so that ultimately the social welfare is ensured. So that is the indirect intervention of the government. That is also possible, and we are going to look at all these things in detailed manner in the current unit. And most important indirect intervention of the government will be regulation. That is the nature of government. Naturally, government will have so many legislations, regulations, rules, regulatory authorities. Through them, government will influence the market. It will not let the market to behave as it wants. If you just see the kind of regulatory authorities that we have in India, for almost each sector there are regulatory authorities. For banking sector there is Reserve Bank of India, for insurance sector there is IRDA, for stock markets there is SEBI, Securities Exchange Board of India. For each sector there is a regulatory authority, and through these regulatory authorities government will try to influence the players, various private players in that sector, so that they will not cross their boundaries and limits and exploit the common consumers. So government's control and government's influence will be intact. For example, even telecom sector is regulated by TRAI, that is Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. Almost for each sector there is one regulatory body which will have its own regulations, and there are numerous legislations in India. We can't even list the number of acts that we have for each type of business. There will be hundreds and hundreds of legislations which will be applicable both at a central government level, state government levels also, and local authority levels also. Lot of influence will be there from the government side on the businesses in private sector, indirectly through legislations, regulations. That is the way government intervenes into the market, both directly, sometimes as a supplier or a purchaser, indirectly through its policies of taxes or subsidies, or through its regulations, legislations, etc. That is the broad categorization of government intervention, we can say. So first of all, why the government intervention is needed? Of course, we know that already according to Unit 2 of this Chapter 2 which we studied, markets fail if the governments don't intervene, we know that. But what is the final objective of the government intervention? We can say, what are the outcomes that we can expect from the government intervention? These are the outcomes that we can expect, and government's objectives will be towards efficient functioning of the markets, to ensure greater welfare to the society, and most importantly to establish rule of law. Very important aspect. If there is no rule of law, people will behave as they wish, and that becomes anarchy, and that will not be treated as a civilized society. So to establish rule of law, government intervention is required. And to create and protect the property rights of the people, government intervention through legislations particularly and judiciary also will be required. To ensure that the contracts are upheld, this is another important aspect, though in India we have a little bit of problems, particularly in these three areas. Not that we are a lawless country or something like that, but still, when compared with many countries, these are the areas where we are not so progressive or advanced, particularly due to the failure of judiciary system as a whole. It has a lot of pending cases, and the resources provided to the judiciary are very less. There are so many thousands of positions of judges which are vacant, which the government is not filling. So naturally the burden on the existing judges will be high. They will not be able to sort all these cases now, and the litigations keep on increasing and mounting and accumulating day by day. So what happens? Ensuring the contracts are upheld, ensuring that property rights are properly protected, and ensuring the rule of law is definitely the role of the government through judiciary. But if the judiciary is not strong enough, then naturally that system will create a problem in the market. And that is very clearly seen in the number of marks that are awarded to India, which is one of the aspects in the ease of doing business index. In the ease of doing business index, we have been doing well when it comes to the creation of laws, creation of legislations, creation of a new act, something like insolvency bankruptcy code, a fantastic development. Something like GST as a new tax regime, theoretically a fantastic development. But problem comes with implementation, judiciary, litigation, and actually ensuring that these things are working. So that is where our rank in the ease of doing business is low in these areas where the implementation matters will arise. Where the creation of law comes, almost I can be sure that we are the number one in the world who can create the best possible laws ever in the human history. Our law-making mechanism is fantastic. Nothing to be definitely doubtful about it. We have the best laws, though we copied most of that from the British laws, but still from them we learned how to draft the laws and how to make new laws also. So as far as creation is concerned, we are fantastic, we are okay. Implementation wise there are problems. So when there are problems, we don't have to say that there are problems, we don't have to shout on them, we don't have to cry for them. They will reflect automatically in the market. When the market goes downwards, market in the sense not stock market, in general the economy as a whole, if it is having problems, if it is showing some problems, definitely one of the reasons for those problems will be these deficiencies also. And any economy will grow naturally by removing those deficiencies rather than hiding them, or rather than preventing, rather than almost like what you call acting, no? Acting like as if, pretending like as if they don't exist. With that, nothing will happen. So these are the areas definitely the improvement is required, government intervention is required more. But of course, these points are not made for India. Anywhere in the world, this is the role of government. Governments should ensure that markets are functioning efficiently. Government should ensure that welfare to the society at a greater level has been reached. Rule of law should be established. Property rights of the people have to be protected. Too much of litigation should not be there. Why it will be there? When the rules are not clear, when our administration system itself is corrupt. There are so many cases where some registrar will register the same land in the name of 2-3 people. So he takes bribes and he just registers the same land in the name of 2-3 people. So many times we see this in the newspapers. It's okay, for him he will retire later on, he will be okay with his own family. But the problem is these people who have been registered in their name the same land, they will fight in the courts for decades together. That creates a problem. So property rights have to be clear and they should be protected very well. Very important aspect when we look at a capitalist economy or a market economy, because individual property right is the fundamental characteristic of a market economy. If that is not protected, then the basis or foundation of the market economy itself will be little bit weak. Contracts should be upheld, definitely yes, and to set up the necessary institutions for the proper functioning of the markets. So the institutions, so many institutions are there just now as we discussed: Reserve Bank of India, Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority, IRDA, SEBI, TRAI. Why all these institutions are there? Competition Commission of India. Why all these institutions are there? These are all there for ensuring proper functioning of the markets. When we say markets, we have to always understand we are talking about country, economy as a whole. That is the reason why government intervention is required, or we can say the objectives of government intervention at a broader level are all these items. Now, let us enter into the government intervention one by one related to each of the reasons for market failure. So, we are looking at the answers now. We had the problem earlier. Market power is a problem. If you leave it to the market, definitely few organizations will become more powerful and they will have monopoly power and they will be able to charge exorbitant prices from the people or their consumers, and that is going to lead to market failure. We observed that earlier in the unit 2. Now, what should be the response of government in order to minimize that market power? How can government minimize that market power? Can it just like that say, okay, from tomorrow your company is closed, I don't want your company in our country, get out of my country? Sometimes back it happened. Long back we heard the stories, though I was not aware of it live, but we used to hear stories like Indira Gandhi has kicked the Coca-Cola company out of the country of India long back, somewhere in 80s, somewhere prior to my birth also probably, where the company, such a large giant multinational also, was just kicked out of the country. So, but that kind of policies will not attract investments. That will be detrimental to the international investments. So those were old days where some autocratic type of thought process was working in some countries, and that depends upon the individual who was leading at that time also. Whatever it is, some people might praise her for the kind of courage that she showed for directly attacking a internationally giant company like Coca-Cola. Some people will say that that has delayed the India's growth process, because the foreign companies or multinationals will always have that doubt in their mind. Okay, we will come to India, but what is the guarantee that tomorrow somebody will say that, okay boss, you are banned, your company is banned, your app is banned, your operations in India are banned. That is not good thing. I mean, that is not something which ideally should be done. But yes, there should be some other ways of government intervention to minimize market power. Of course, government has the definite authority to ban anybody, whether it is an organization or an individual or any activity. That is the authority of the government. But if that is used or misused quite frequently, that will create a bad precedent for the investments to flow into the country, especially in the current day scenario of globalization. That is not a very good sign, generally considered to be not a good sign. So how the government has to intervene into the market to minimize the market power? So this is a very important aspect. For example, when we see the capitalist economies, developed economies like USA, UK and all, there the original idea of capitalism itself is that, market economy itself is that you should leave the market alone. You should not intervene. You should not always intervene into the market and influence it. You leave it. Market will take care of itself. That is the original thought of market economy and capitalism, which changed, as I said, after the Second World War, mostly after the 60s and 70s of the 20th century. So what happened slowly? It was now argued that government intervention to the market is important. If not, the market power will become so high that it will be creating a problem to the social welfare. So the question is, how can government intervene? So many things are there. Practically government can do anything. That we have to understand. In any country, government is all powerful. Lot of times people think that government daily, these people are all visible on television. We just take them very light. The power of government, most of the people don't really understand. When you see the actual the nature of the state and government, then you will see the real authority that governments can have. Recently, examples can be taken like sudden decision of banning TikTok, decision of banning games like PUBG, whereas the same game was already very popular and even mentioned by the Prime Minister also. But the same government has banned the same game PUBG. Reasons different. But point is, they have the authority to do that. They have the authority to influence the market in the way they want. But still, as I said, occasionally some things, particular items, it's okay. Carpet bombing of many things at the same time, and irrespective of the nature of the companies, always adopting a very aggressive policy will cause investments to shrink in the long run. That we cannot see now, but it might have a negative impact in future. We don't know that. But is that the only way? Definitely not. What is that most of the governments will do, including Indian government, is that they can establish the laws and regulations which will promote the competitive economy by prohibiting the actions. What they are prohibiting? Not companies. They are prohibiting actions which are likely to restrain the competition. So if any company is probably doing some actions which are restraining the competition, then what the government will do is that prohibit such actions which might restrain the competition. In other words, to simplify all this, government would always like to promote competitive economy. It should not allow monopolies to grow. It should not allow one or two players, one or two individuals or one or two corporations or companies or few organizations in the country to grow. That is not market economy. That is danger to the market economy, as we have already seen, which results in market failure due to the excessive market power by few organizations. So government will have to establish laws and regulations to promote competitive economy and prohibit the actions which might cause or restrain the competition, which might restrict the competition. Such kind of actions should be prohibited by the government. So that is the way how government can intervene to minimize the market power of few corporations. What are the examples of that? In India we have Competition Act. In USA they have antitrust laws. These are the names only, but essence is same. Ultimately, what is the aim of these legislations is to prohibit the contracts, combinations and collusions among the producers or traders which are in restraint of trade and other anti-competitive actions, something like predatory pricing. These are the objectives of such legislations. They will prohibit or control the contracts, combinations and collusions. So for example, if two corporations have to merge with each other, they cannot just like that do without the approval of the government. After getting the antitrust laws invoked, after a lot of discussion and after a lot of deliberations, only such merger will be approved. Even in America, which is one of the most capitalist countries in the world, even there, the markets and companies are not free to do whatever they want to do. Like an example, if you say Microsoft and Google want to merge tomorrow, can they do that? Maybe yes, but it is not that easy. It is not easy automatically. Just like Microsoft and Google shareholders and some top percentage shareholders and CEOs decided to merge. They signed a document, memorandum of understanding, and after 1 week the merger is done. No, it is not like that. Government will intervene into such merger because that could be a collusion, that could be a combination that might keep that merged entity or the proposed merged entity on a very monopolistic position. That might be anti-competitive. So that cannot be allowed. Like that the government at America might think, of course. If the government thinks that it is not anti-competitive, it might allow also. I am not saying it will not be allowed. But the point is, it cannot happen without the government's scrutiny. That's what I am saying. So Competition Act in India or antitrust laws in USA specifically prohibit such kind of collusions and combinations and some contracts which might restrain the trade and competition. And they will also restrain certain predatory pricing type of actions. Competition Commission of India. In India we have this regulatory authority, we can call it Competition Commission of India, CCI. It's a quasi judiciary authority, CCI, Competition Commission of India. Anybody who is thinking that their competitor is doing predatory pricing, means pricing is so low so that he will grab the entire market and kick all the competitors out of the market. Are you able to smell something? In the recent past? Definitely yes. Jio is a classic example of that. Reliance Jio has been doing predatory pricing. Okay, you and I can say it is predatory pricing, but Competition Commission of India also has to say. That is a different story. If it does not say, then it is not predatory pricing. But the point is, do we have a system where other companies can go to Competition Commission of India and say that, boss, we want this Reliance Jio to stop this predatory pricing? At least that mechanism is there. Nobody can just like that start a telecom company and start giving free offers, 100 rupees, 1 year data, something like that. Too much of cheap pricing is example of predatory pricing, which Reliance Jio did. But once again, that is only an opinion. I opining that or somebody else opining that will not matter. Who has to also agree with that is Competition Commission of India. So Airtel, other companies have gone to the Competition Commission of India and prayed for intervening into such predatory pricing. It's a different story that they did not intervene. That is all practical issues. But the point is there such a mechanism at least? Yes, we have mechanism. As I said, we are fantastic in having our mechanisms and structures. No doubt in that. The only problem is whether we really follow it or not. We will have everything. We have laws, we have regulations, we have institutions which are supposed to do their job according to the ideals which were established. Whether they do it or not is a different story. And when they do it, that will be done according to the data and information they have, not according to our whims and fancies. We may feel otherwise. That does not have any impact on their decisions. But the fact is, we have a proper system where there can be a petition or an application by other competitors to prevent the other competitors following anti-competitive actions like predatory pricing. That is the way we have proper institutions like Competition Commission of India, and we have an act in India called Competition Act. That is one of the ways of minimizing the market power. Government can establish laws, LAWS laws, and regulations and institutions also, which will ensure that these laws and regulations are followed. That is one way. Another way of intervening into the market to reduce market power is establish price regulating mechanisms by setting up price ceilings. Government can put price ceilings. We have a price regulating mechanism. For example, we have in India Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, CERC, Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. What it will do? It will make sure that the electricity companies are not charging a price which is higher than what is the ideal price. Once again, we have it. We have the CERC. Whether it is working or not, whether some of the private electricity companies like Adani Power are charging very high rates and tariffs in Mumbai, which we have seen during May and June. That's a different story. Whether it is working or not is a different story. Again, let us not get into the application aspect of it. But we do have a mechanism. We do have a price regulating mechanism, and we have a Central Electricity Regulatory Commission which is supposed to work and which is supposed to set price ceilings beyond which the companies cannot charge on to their customers. So that is another way. So one way to establish the laws and regulations. Second way is to establish price regulating mechanism. That is how the government can intervene into the market for minimizing the market power of few corporations. It's a different story once again, whether these are actually implemented or not. Some of them yes, some of them no. There will be always both the sides. We cannot be just biased or prejudiced in these things. Look at this, some of the news headlines which will tell us the existence of at least such system in India. For example, this Competition Commission of India and Jio cartelization plea against Airtel Vodafone Idea was rejected by Supreme Court. See, on one side, Airtel earlier said, somewhere in 2017, that Jio was doing predatory pricing. Then Competition Commission of India said, no, nothing was wrong with that. But when Jio has filed a case with CCI against Airtel and Vodafone, CCI was with Jio. You can understand why. That's a different story. But Competition Commission of India was supporting Reliance Jio, saying that Airtel and Vodafone and Idea have cartelized. These three have cartelized and they are acting against Jio. So Jio also, yes, anybody can go to CCI. When Airtel went to CCI, CCI said, get lost. When Jio went to CCI, CCI said, yes, you are right. This looks like cartelization. Airtel, Vodafone Idea are joining together and they are creating some kind of bias against the Jio's customers. That was CCI's opinion. Nothing wrong, nothing right. Not in my opinion, that is CCI's opinion. But thankfully we have something else also, that is Supreme Court. So Supreme Court said CCI is wrong. Means there is no cartelization, obviously. So whether Supreme Court is correct or CCI is correct, we cannot judge on that. We are not the judges. We are only looking at the news. This is a case which happened actually somewhere in 2018. So this shows that we have a mechanism particularly to at least go and appeal if there is any anti-competitive practices by our competitors. This is one of the examples. Of course, this is a common thing which is already happening and which has been happening also, like Reliance versus Jio versus Airtel. Market domination is happening and that is going to hurt the customers, is what some of the, we can say, economists or people who have editorial opinions can say. But the point is what? There is definitely a domination fight. Competition is not really fair competition. There is some kind of unfair practices being followed by maybe both. So how to control that? How to reduce that? There are many authorities for that. So there is Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, TRAI is there. Definitely that has its own role to play. Competition Commission of India is there. That is also one more authority which will try to resolve such kind of issues if there is any anti-competitive actions taken or done by any of the players in the market. So this is a practical example of how government will intervene. Government intervene does not mean directly some finance minister or prime minister will intervene. There will be departments for that. And what is the government's department or institution which will intervene into such situations in India is CCI. that is the Competition Commission of India. That is one example of India. Look at this international examples, particularly American examples. American examples, if you see, the Federal Trade Commission (FTC) interviewed Zuckerberg, the one of the most richest persons in the world. Definitely, we can say the youngest billionaire. We can say such kind of Facebook CEO, as you all know. He was interviewed by the Federal Trade Commission in USA. Who is Federal Trade Commission? That is one of the, like in India we have the CCI, Competition Commission of India. They have Federal Trade Commission. It's the same similar version of CCI in America. So they called Mark Zuckerberg and interviewed. Why? Because they had some questions about antitrust probe, whether Facebook is following any antitrust policies or anti-competitive policies. That much power they have. Who are those people? After all, government employees. Who is Zuckerberg? Top most CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world, at least by money point of view. So still, that is a power. That is the power of the government and government organizations that can be seen very clearly in that news item. And one of the Reuters news item says even about Google, and this is a very recent item, September 15th, 2020. Google faces grilling on the ad business before US Senate antitrust panel. So US Senate is similar to Parliament, not like exactly in India, where they have an antitrust panel. Antitrust is not a trust, don't think in a literal manner, anti-competitive basically. They call it antitrust because the law name there itself is antitrust law. So antitrust panel was asking Google to explain what kind of policies it is adopting and why is it not anti-competitive. Google has to explain to them, and they will have questions to ask to Google. They will grill them actually, literally. They will investigate. That is the way government intervention will be there into the market power. Imagine the biggest capitalist economy in the world, which is supposed to just leave any company on its own, leave the market on its own without an intervention, ideally speaking, according to the theory of market economy or capitalism. Still, they have robust systems of ensuring that market power is not used by few powerful corporations to exploit the market or consumers. That is the intervention of the government, which is required definitely to control, curb, reduce the market power. So that, why is it required? Okay, government says, no, why should I care? I will not do anything. I will just sit and sleep. Then what happens? Market power will increase, and we know it will lead to market failure. Dangerous for whom? Dangerous for the country only. You may think that, few people got richer, they are all great, Fortune 500 people, companies, top 10 billionaires, top 20 billionaires, they may become rich and rich, no problem. There's nothing wrong in that, being rich or wealthy. But is that happening with a overall welfare to the entire society or not, also is the thing that government has to ensure. Otherwise what happens? The poor will anyway suffer, and along with the poor, the rich will also become poorer in future. How? Because the poor are the ones ultimately going to be the consumers of the rich. If the poor do not have money, how come the rich will earn money from where they will earn? They will not. So it is a system of cycle. So in this cycle, that has to run properly, and these filters have to be there always. Otherwise, overall, you can say the water will stink. It has to be filtered as much as possible. And who has to do that filtration? That has to be done by government. Otherwise, few dominant firms will exert market power, and that will be definitely leading to market failure. Governments should intervene, and they will intervene through these regulations. In India, we have Competition Act, and we have this Competition Commission of India as an authority. In US, they have antitrust laws, and they have this FTC, Federal Trade Commission, as an authority, which will ensure that antitrust laws are implemented. That is how government intervention will be there in controlling, reducing, curbing market power. Now moving on to the second reason for market failures, which is externalities. Of course, if left to the market will create externalities. We have seen that. Of course, we are not much bothered about positive externalities, though positive externalities also should be encouraged by the government. We will come to that part later. But majorly the problem comes why the markets fail. Markets will not fail because of positive externalities. They fail because of majorly negative externalities. Particularly if you say, as an example, biggest negative externality that any industry creates throughout the world is pollution. So ultimately, how the government should tackle this? It's a tricky thing. If you say, I don't want pollution, you will not have development also. You will not have growth also. If you say, I want full growth only, I don't want anything to look at, I want to grow at much faster pace, then naturally you will have side effects like pollution and environmental damage. That is where the balance has to be struck. And government cannot lead everything to the market, everything to the private players. If left, definitely they will cause externalities, and negative externalities may dangerously lead to market failures. Ideally, that should not happen. So what should the government do in order to correct these externalities? When we say correct, we are talking about negative externalities, we should understand. So governments definitely will have to use various methods to reduce the effects of negative externalities and also to promote positive externalities. Both should be done by the government. Reduce negative externalities, promote positive externalities. First, let us focus on negative externalities, taking example of pollution. That will give us better clear idea about how the government intervention can be there into market to control or reduce the negative externality like pollution. So what government initiatives could be there towards the negative externalities? We can classify them broadly into two categories. One is direct controls, two is market-based policies. What are direct controls? And what is the objective we are looking at here? To curb negative externalities is the objective. What government should do to curb the negative externalities? One, it can have direct controls. What will be the direct controls? That will openly regulate the actions of those involved in generating the negative externalities. It will regulate the actions of all the people who are involved in generating the negative externalities. Something like, let us say, ban. Let us say gutka, ban. Ban. That is regulating the actions. Nobody can eat it, of course. Once again, implementation wise, is it really banned? Are they available? Let us not get into that. But government wise, yes, direct government control, it can ban some things. Lot of states in India are actually alcohol free, at least by law. Bihar, for example, or Gujarat, for example, they have banned the liquor products. That is a government intervention, direct control. They regulate the actions of the people who are involved in generating negative externalities. So that is one way of direct control. Of course, direct controls will be how? Through, again, laws and regulations only. That is the only way. That is direct controls. Sometimes that will be effective, and sometimes there could be market-based policies also. Market-based policies means what? They will provide economic incentives so that the self-interest of market participants would achieve the socially optimal solution. You don't have to do for society and all, because people are selfish. Government itself will create such kind of a market-based policy that if you do these good things, you will get a benefit. It is like a carrot and stick approach. Market-based policies are carrot type approach. Direct controls are stick approach. Stick approach means we will punish you if you do something wrong. Carrot approach means we will incentivize you if you don't do something wrong. That is the other way of looking at it. Of course, in India, market-based policies are not so effective or popular. People are not that much aware of them. So it is difficult to implement them. But these are not only restricted to India, that we have to understand. The theories we are looking at, the theories we are studying are international theories. Whether all of them are going to happen in India or not always not possible. All of them will be effective in India, we cannot expect that. But yes, theoretically, these are the two types of initiatives that governments might take towards curbing the negative externalities. One is direct controls, Second one is market-based policies. Direct controls will regulate the actions of the people who are going to generate the negative externalities. Market-based policies will provide the economic incentives to the people so that for the self-interest of the market participants, for themselves, they will stop generating negative externalities. That in turn will reach the socially optimal solution. We will look at these two things in detail, one by one. What are direct controls? So direct controls are those which prohibit specific activities that explicitly create negative externalities or require that negative externality to be limited to a certain level. Those type of controls are called as direct controls. Simply speaking, they prohibit certain activities which might cause negative externalities. For example, production, use and sale of many commodities and services are prohibited in India, like drugs. Same way, smoking is completely banned in many public places. That is an example of direct control. Stringent rules are in place in respect of tobacco advertising, packaging and labeling also. So these are all what aimed at what? Simply prohibiting certain activities which might in turn create certain negative externalities. Those type of intervention by the government are called as direct controls. Prohibitory controls, we can say. Then, what about legislations? Can legislations also regulate the negative externalities? Definitely yes, to some extent, for sure. If you take some of the situations where the legislations are in place to regulate the negative externalities in Indian context, we have Environment Protection Act of 1986, like that. So many acts are there in India: Water Pollution Prevention and Control Act, Air Pollution Prevention and Control Act, like that. So many acts are there. So the government might pass such type of legislations or laws to alleviate or eradicate the effects of the negative externalities. And what the government will do in accordance with those acts, it will stipulate certain rules which protect the environment by specifying the actions by the producers and consumers, what they are supposed to do and what they are not supposed to do. You see, even a normal two-wheeler or a four-wheeler has to get a pollution test passed. There will be pollution check, pollution under check, PUC certificate is required, which will be issued every 6 months. So the rule like that ensures, at least at an overall level, the pollution is under control and people are aware that they are bound to have lesser emissions. Even for producers as well as consumers, such legislations can be prescribed and we can see them on a day-to-day basis also. From a consumer point of view, PUC is an example, pollution under control or pollution under check is an example of consumer level restriction. Same way, producer level, manufacturer level restrictions are so many in India. So many environmental laws are there in India which will require the producers and manufacturers to follow certain norms and guidelines and rules so that the pollution levels are lesser and environment is protected. And not only that, government may through some legislation fix the emission standards. Emission standards are what? There is a legal limit on how much pollutants a firm can emit. Of course, you cannot say, I want a cement factory but there should not be any pollution. Not possible. There will be pollution. Along with any manufacturing activity, there will be some pollution. But how much pollution is the point? How much pollution? Is it unlimited pollution? Unlimited emissions that a factory can emit into the environment? That cannot be allowed by the government. So government can fix certain limits, legal limits on how much pollutants a firm can emit. Of course, if a firm exceeds this limit. And how do the government know there are excesses or excess emissions from this particular industry? There will be inspectors. There will be people in the pollution control board. Those officers will inspect periodically to check whether a particular industry, particular manufacturing unit is exceeding the limits prescribed by law, and if they exceeded, that can invite monetary penalties and even sometimes criminal liabilities also according to those legislations, which means there is an additional expenditure to the firm leading to the rise in the firm's average cost. They have to control the pollution within the standards prescribed by law. How can they do that? Only by installing certain pollution control equipment, which costs them. In other words, that additional cost is factored into the firm's average cost. And if you remember the problem with the externalities, the social cost and private cost are different. If externalities are ignored, what the firms will consider? Only private cost they will consider. They will ignore the social cost completely. By fixing these regulations and limits, what the government is trying to do is they are increasing this private cost. In other words, we can say they are internalizing the social cost also into the private cost. Will they be able to do that 100%? Not possible. Nobody is telling that. But at least to some extent, whether the private cost is increased due to the requirements of laws that a particular organization has to follow certain environmental norms, definitely yes. Because of that, the average cost of the firm in manufacturing such units, such production, will be more. That is the way the government will create certain legislations which intend to regulate the negative externalities. Once again, one of the biggest negative externality that manufacturers will create on the society is pollution. That is why mostly our example is revolving around pollution and environment. Also, the government can form certain special bodies or boards or institutions which will address this problem. For example, at a central government level, we have Ministry of Environment and Forest. Pollution control boards are there, which is at central level also, and even state pollution control boards are also there. So these are all the organizations or institutions or special bodies or boards which will regulate this pollution at their level best if they are working properly. But the system is there, the structure is there, the regulations and the laws and the legislations, acts are there in place, the statutes are in place, and they have to be implemented well for effective control and curbing of negative externalities. That is how government will regulate negative externalities through legislations and regulations. So direct controls will straight away prohibit certain activities. Just stop. No, you cannot do this. Same way, legislations and regulations can definitely curb the negative externalities, particularly from producer's point of view. That is the direct controls discussion. Then, what are the market-based approaches to control the negative externalities? And if you remember the government's reaction to the negative externalities, there are two approaches. One is direct and the other one is market-based approaches. Direct approach or direct control has two things. One is completely prohibiting. Two is providing certain limits, and crossing that limit will attract penalties. Both of them are direct controls by the government. And government departments are there which are working to ensure the application of these legislations. But government can also have market-based approaches to control negative externalities. Once again, these are more international in nature. In India, market-based approaches are not that popular, though governments try that. Mostly the direct controls are preferred in India because of our administrative system also being robust. We have so many departments like pollution control departments and boards. So they will have their own setup, lot of employees working there, and they will be trying to implement the environmental laws in India. But not only from Indian context, theoretically, how the government can control negative externalities other than direct controls is through market-based approaches. So what these kind of market-based approaches will create? They will create an incentive for change. They are not going to punish actually. Always there will be an incentive to change. Incentive can be given without punishment, with punishment, both. To avoid punishment is also an incentive, no? So that kind of incentive is also there. But definitely there will be a motivation for the market players to change. Change what? Change in a better way, so that they will create lesser and lesser negative externalities. So that is how the market-based approaches try to create an incentive for change, and they rely on what? Economic incentives. It is not about the fear of going to jail or fear of getting arrested or something like that. The incentives here are economic incentives to accomplish the environmental goals. Once again, we are looking at pollution as a lead example of biggest negative externality. In other words, these market-based approaches focus on generation of a market price for pollution. And as we discussed earlier, pollution is there, it is happening. And the firms which are creating that pollution don't care about the social cost, what they are causing. So through these market-based approaches, what the governments might try to generate is a market price for pollution. So that means, simply speaking, the polluter should pay. The polluter, whoever is polluting the environment, should incur some economic costs. Then only he will understand the pain of it. Then only he will think that, okay, this is not just a social cost, it is my private cost also, so I should bring the pollution down. That is the idea or the thought process behind this market-based approaches. Purely, we are creating a kind of market price for pollution. And there also there are two possibilities how this market price for pollution can be achieved. One, again, directly setting a price through a pollution tax. Pollution tax the government will levy, and if any organization is emitting more than the standard norms prescribed by the law, government will be levying a pollution tax directly onto those organizations which are polluting. So that is one way of achieving this incentivization for change and making or creating a market price for pollution. Second way is, which is more sophisticated and popular in Europe than anywhere else, is setting a price indirectly through the establishment of cap and trade systems. Cap and trade. Cap means top, means there is a limit. Maximum that you can create pollution is that much. If at all you created more than that, then you are supposed to buy certain permits. That means you cannot pollute just like that. You need permission to pollute. And that permission to pollute is an instrument which can be purchased and sold. Such type of market instruments are called cap and trade instruments. The most popular example of that, maybe you would have heard this, those are carbon credits. Carbon credits is an example of such cap and trade system. More prevalent in Europe. India is trying, maybe it will take some more time for getting more popularity to this type of environmental awareness. But still, these are the two ways how government can control the negative externalities through market-based approach. One, directly with a pollution tax. Two, indirectly by establishing cap and trade system. Let us discuss each of them in detail one by one. First thing is pollution taxes. Will they be effective? How can they be effective? In other words, what are the positive points of pollution taxes? What are pollution taxes? All these things, if that is a question asked, these are the points, so some of them you have to write. So what is the objective here by levying pollution taxes is, we want to internalize the negative externality. We want to internalize that. We means the government wants to internalize the negative externality, and one of the ways of ensuring that is imposing pollution taxes. And these taxes are named after A.C. Pigot, one of the famous economists. So these are sometimes called as Pigovian taxes also, just general knowledge. And what these taxes are effectively doing, they are making the polluter pay. So they are making the polluter pay, which means in turn they are internalizing the external costs into the price of a product or activity. So naturally what happened? The external cost that is generated through this pollution has become internalized because the polluter has to pay this pollution tax. So that is how internalization of negative externality has happened if government is levying pollution taxes or Pigovian taxes. And of course, the size of the tax depends upon the amount of the pollution that a firm produces. Naturally, when a firm is producing more pollution, it will have to pay more tax. If another firm is producing less pollution, then naturally it will pay less tax. That is the way these pollution taxes are levied. And what is the consequence of that? That increases the private cost of production or consumption. Naturally, because it is internalizing the external cost. Earlier the private cost was lesser. By imposing this pollution tax, that external cost also has become internalized or it has become private cost. Because of this, naturally, when the price increases, what happens normally in the market economy? That would decrease the quantity demanded, and therefore output of the good also will be decreased, which was creating a negative externality. So simply speaking, the pollution taxes will increase the price by internalizing the external cost and thereby reducing the demand for such kind of commodities, which ultimately resulted in the negative externality in the first place. So that is how indirectly the government is trying to reduce the pollution, we can say. And of course, the tax collection that the government has from these pollution taxes can be used specifically to protect the environment also. That is not in our hands, that the government's wish. Definitely, when the government is collecting some tax in the name of pollution tax, ideally it is supposed to do what? Ideally it is supposed to spend for protecting the environment. That's what some people argue. Fine. Ideally, yes. Ideally, the pollution taxes collected by government should be spent on protecting the environment. This is the way the pollution taxes work, and if these are levied and collected properly, definitely they can be effective in reducing the negative externalities. How is that? Look at this graph in a general level. Of course, originally the private cost was lesser originally, and if this pollution taxes were not there, this would have been the cost, the marginal private cost. Marginal benefit is the same. Whatever that commodity is causing to the society, it is the same. But marginal private cost was lesser without pollution taxes, which means this is the equilibrium point. That means the society is manufacturing quantity A, which is higher quantity of that commodity because of lesser private cost. And we have seen that earlier also, that will cause a lot of this area of welfare loss. This is the welfare loss, which is created due to the negative externality. Now what is the reaction of the government? What it has done, it has increased the private cost by levying the pollution taxes. So this is the amount of pollution taxes that the government has levied, which means the marginal private cost has increased from this to this, which resulted in equilibrium to change from here to here. So if let us say this is point X and this is point Y, earlier the equilibrium point was X, quantity produced and sold in the market was QA. Now the equilibrium point is Y and the quantity produced and sold is lesser, that is QS. What happened because of this? The quantity produced of that commodity which was creating negative externality has become lesser. That's what we want. Because of that, what happened? Price of the commodity has increased definitely. Quantity demanded of that commodity has reduced. And naturally, when the quantity demanded is reduced, that commodity is produced lesser and lesser, and that will reduce the negative externality over a period of time. This is how pollution taxes simply increase the marginal private cost and reduce the quantity produced by the market, and definitely reduce the welfare loss. Earlier the welfare loss was how much? This much. This was the welfare loss earlier. Now the welfare loss is only this much. So this is the welfare loss. So the remaining welfare loss was saved now to that extent by levying pollution taxes. That is the way pollution taxes work. But is this system foolproof? Are there any problems in this system? Definitely, like any other system, this also has problems or limitations. First and foremost thing is they are difficult to determine. How much to be taxed is difficult to determine. We cannot arbitrarily determine something. And more than that, administering these taxes is very, very difficult. You may say that, okay, pollution, if you cross this much of pollution, you have to pay this much tax. Okay, boss, who is going to go and check whether a particular industry has crossed or not? There are lakhs and lakhs of factories throughout the country. And if you take even in the other countries also, so many factories will be there. Will the administration system be sufficient to go and check and find out whether a particular manufacturer is crossing the pollution limits and subject to pollution taxes? How is it possible? Not possible. Otherwise, you need to have devices otherwise, which will automatically alarm when the pollution crosses a particular level. And those devices will be again costly. And who will have to install those devices? Government has to install, and government will not be able to afford that unnecessarily. So in India, though, it is like dur ki baat, difficult, very difficult to determine and administer. And another point, which is always a case, particularly with the goods having inelastic demand. Inelastic demand means even though the price rises, the people will not be reducing the consumption of that. The demand of that commodity will not reduce that much, even though the price is more. If such kind of goods are there, then the tax may only have an insignificant effect on reducing the demand. So just now we thought that the demand will reduce and the quantity will go down from QA to QS. If the commodity we are looking at is inelastic type of commodity, then that might not happen, because people will not reduce the demand of that, people will not reduce the consumption of that. So in spite of the higher cost, in spite of the higher price, they will still go for same level of consumption. So the purpose is not served. Then the method of taxing the polluters may involve use of complex and costly administrative procedures. That's what we were looking at earlier also. It is very complex to, first of all, find out and calculate the tax and collect it also. How to measure is the biggest question mark. How do you measure pollution? So many types of pollutions are there. Lakhs and lakhs of factories are there which are causing pollution. How are you going to administer that? It is very complex and very expensive procedure. So though theoretically it is okay, practically it is very difficult to administer it. And basically this method does not provide any genuine solution to the problem. By levying pollution taxes, are you reducing pollution? Actually no. We are only increasing the cost of the production, that's all. Is it really giving a solution to the problem? No, it is not giving any genuine solution to the problem. It is only just trying to create some kind of reform, that too at a very high cost. So once again, if you look at the cost benefit analysis of pollution taxes, the cost of collecting the pollution taxes and administering it is much higher than the benefits that will be resulted from that in general. That is why pollution taxes may not properly work in reality. Theoretically, yes, Pigou has told that Pigouvian taxes are fantastic, we will write if that is asked. Why they are not fantastic, we will write this if this is asked. Both positive points are there, negative points also will be there. And from a country point of view, these pollution taxes might have negative consequences on employment and growth, naturally resulting in lesser and lesser investments. Since if a country is charging high pollution taxes, then that might encourage the producers to shift their production facilities to those countries with lower taxes. This is one of the practical scenarios that happened, particularly where many manufacturing units from Europe moved to China. Okay, there are other factors also, but when you say cost is a comprehensive cost. Yes, in China labor cost is less, in China other factor costs like land are cheaper, those things are all there. But one of the major factors is in Europe, because of the high environmental awareness in the European governments and European Union, they had stricter controls and regulations on the pollution that any manufacturing organization can generate. Lot of environmental regulations in Europe are almost strictest in the entire world. So what the manufacturers did slowly, and no one is an exception, almost every European manufacturing company, whether it is manufacturing automobiles, whether it is manufacturing cloths, or whether it is manufacturing any other electronic equipments or software and hardware products particularly, all of them almost have moved to China, because the environmental regulations in China are as good as non-existent. They are there, but they are not that much stringent, and generally over the period of time, almost since 1980s, China has been very investor friendly in the form that they never cared about what those multinationals have done to the environment. So lesser stringent environmental laws are there. I'm not saying that anybody can just like go and pollute in China, but compared to Europe, environmental protection and environmental laws are lesser in China. So what happened? The investments moved from Europe to China. That affected the European economy badly, and unemployment has increased, and we have seen some of the European countries even becoming bankrupt, like Greece. Various other reasons are also there. I'm not saying that pollution taxes is the only reason. But is this also one of the reasons? Definitely yes. It is also one of the reasons why many industries moved to China, because they have regulatory procedures which are less stringent than other countries. And you can recently observe from the Indian context also. India recently has brought a new environmental policy. New environmental policy, when you look at the name of it, it looks like, wow, it is going to protect the environment. But actually it is the other way around. We want to just almost create a situation similar to China and India, wherein we will attract foreign investment without much caring about the kind of pollution that they might cause. So objective is very clear. After the coronavirus and COVID, many companies might be willing to move their manufacturing facilities from China to other countries, though it has not happened at a full-fledged level. The hope is that in future it might happen. So India also wants to have its own card played by attracting the foreign investments. So the compromise has to be done. So we are more concerned about environment, you will not get investments and growth. You are too much of inclined to foreign investments, growth and all these things, then you have to compromise on environment. This balance is the difficult thing that any government will have to face, and there will be always people on both sides. Again, when we say government policies, there will be always people who will support them, and there will be always people who will oppose them. We cannot say one is better and one is wrong, and one is completely, utterly wrong. Both have their own points. But the fact is, these pollution taxes might actually discourage investment because of stricter environmental norms. That is one of the big limitations of these pollution taxes. These are all the negative sides or flip side of pollution taxes, we can say. Now moving on to cap and trade permits, the other way of market mechanism which tries to create a market price for pollution. We want to create a market price for pollution. One of the market prices for pollution was pollution taxes. Now there can be another way of creating a market price for pollution. These are called cap and trade permits, and as I told already, classic example of that can be carbon credits. What are these permits? These are marketable licenses. In other words, government is giving license to pollute. Of course, because definitely every organization has to pollute something, otherwise manufacturing will not happen. But how much? A limited quantities of pollutants. Only that much license will be given to various manufacturers in the country, let us say. And these licenses can be bought and sold by the polluters. Everybody is polluting, but some of them are polluting more, some of them are polluting less. Naturally that will be there. Everybody will not pollute equally, but they got license to pollute only to some extent. If at all, let us say there is somebody who has polluted lesser, and again quantification of all these things are difficult, whatever the number it is. Let us say somebody is given a license to pollute 100 what? Don't ask me, 100 something, just like a number for example. So he is eligible to pollute 100 level, but he has polluted only, let us say 70. Okay, so he has polluted 70, means what? Let us say 100 carbon credits he got as a level, 70 carbon credits worth pollution only he has done, which means what? 30 carbon credits he still have. what he can do? He can sell them. He can sell these carbon credits to other manufacturer. Other manufacturer, let us say, has polluted 130, right? But he has only 100 because government granted only 100, that is the limit. So what he has to do? There is no option. He has to buy this 30 from the less polluter. In other words, the bigger polluters will have to buy these permits or licenses from the lesser polluters, and this is how the cap and trade permits will work. And these are the marketable licenses to emit limited quantities of pollutants, and these are negotiable instruments. Don't expect all these things in India. It will take a lot of time for us to reach that level, though we are already on that road. We started that, but again, not to the level it is desired yet. But Europe has a very active carbon credit policy, and these cap and trade permits are bought, sold by many organizations very freely in the market. So what happens here? Since these permits are transferable, different pollution levels are possible across the regulated entities. Naturally, somebody polluted 70 only and somebody polluted 130. That is the different levels of pollution, which is always there possible. So what should happen? The high polluters will have to buy more permits. So this 130 polluter has to buy 30 permits because he has only 100 credits already. He needs to buy 30 credits or permits. That naturally will increase their cost. So 30 permits he is buying from somebody outsider. So will this lesser polluter will give free to the bigger polluter these 30 credits which he has? No, it is an asset. This 30 what this person has is an asset that will be sold by this person to this person, and because of that higher polluters will have to buy, and that will increase the cost. Naturally, that will make them less competitive and less profitable. When the cost is more, prices will be more, then you will be unable to attract the customers well. That will be less competitive and less profitable. That means they are discouraged basically to pollute more. And on the other side, low polluters will receive extra revenue. These people have sold 30 credits. They got money here. So they got extra revenue from selling their surplus permits. That makes them more competitive and more profitable. So the profits of a firm which has less pollution will be higher than the profits of the firm which makes more pollution. Is how it works, again at a theoretical level. Practically, it's a different story. But yes, the logic or concept is same. The high polluter has to pay by buying the permits. The less polluter will earn by selling the permits. So naturally, the firms will have an incentive not to pollute. Everybody will over a period of time try to not pollute, so that they will use only their licenses what were granted by the government. Let us say 100 is the norm fixed by the government. They try to stick to that 100. If they cross that 100, then they are bound to buy those extra permits which will cost them. In other words, once again, what is happening, if you observe, is the same. We are internalizing an external cost. External cost is pollution. That is internalized by creating an economic value for it in the form of cap and trade permits, and by creating a cost for pollution, this cap and trade permits system will work. And what are the advantages of this type of system of tradable permits? First thing first, this system allows flexibility and rewards the efficiency. Generic words, but yes, flexibility is there. You can definitely have as much pollution as you want, but you have to buy the credits if you are crossing the limit. So naturally it will reward the efficiency. Those who are efficient will be rewarded, and administratively it is cheap. Compared to the pollution taxes, definitely it is much cheaper, because government has nothing to do here, because it has created a market, private market for these tradable permits. Government intervention is very limited. Government, what it said, only it gave these 100 to the people as an example that we have taken. To that extent only is government job. After that, 30 sold by one private operator to another private operator, that has nothing to do with government. So definitely there is no administrative cost involved for government. Automatically it is again market regulated, and it is simple to implement when compared with pollution taxes, and it ensures that pollution is minimized in the most cost effective manner, naturally, because nobody is required to have any collection and collection of taxes, spending of them, all these things are not there. So lot of costs that government administration might involve can be avoided. So most cost effective way of reducing the pollution or minimizing the pollution is this tradable permit system. And it also provides strong incentives for innovation. Naturally, when you have newer innovations for lesser pollution emitting equipments, then you are more competitive in the world because you don't have to spend on buying these tradable permits. So the organizations over a period of time are forced indirectly to innovate and create such kind of machinery, such kind of equipments which will pollute lesser and lesser. So in other words, this will incentivize the innovation of new technology also. And on the other side, the consumers may benefit if, of course if only, if the extra profits made by the low pollution firms are passed on to them in the form of lower prices. Naturally, if good firms are there, very ethical firms which have lesser pollution, and they are gaining here in this system, because of which the prices of those commodities sold by them can be lesser, and that benefit could be passed to the consumers also. These are the advantages of tradable permits. But are there only advantages? Are there no disadvantages? Of course, like any system, it will also have disadvantages. Any of them can be asked as a question. What are those limitations of this cap and trade system? First thing first, same thing. System does not in reality stop the firms from polluting the environment. Is it really addressing the problem of pollution? No, it is not. Genuinely, it is not stopping pollution. It is only asking the firms to buy more permits if they pollute more. So it is not stopping the firms actually speaking. That is one limitation. Same limitations as in the pollution taxes also. And very important limitation in this is the big firms, bigger organizations with monopolistic power can easily bear the cost of pollution, or even they can pass that additional cost on to the customers. That is the biggest problem. Let us say, just for example, Apple company started some plant in India, and whatever that, of course it will not create any pollution in India because it is only an assembling plant. Just imagine, for imaginary purposes, if they started some manufacturing plant in India and they are causing a lot of pollution, and if at all there is a cap and trade system through which they are supposed to buy some carbon credits, that is nothing for them. They are so powerful, they have so much of huge profits and surpluses, they can easily bear the cost of that pollution. That may not be a big burden for them. On the other side, they can even pass that burden to the customers by adding it to the price. They don't care about it. When the firms, big firms are having monopolistic power, this pollution, additional cost of pollution through this cap and trade instruments, or even in the form of pollution taxes. Actually, these limitations are there same for both. Both of them, they don't care, because for them it is okay. They can absorb that additional cost. Or even if they don't want to absorb, they can pass that additional cost on to their customers also because of their monopolistic power. That is the other problem of this type of system. But on the other hand, contrary, smaller firms will be lesser competitive, because naturally if you observe which firms will make or create lesser pollution by installing costly pollution control equipments, only bigger firms can afford that. Only bigger firms can afford that. Just to take a simple example, like you take a big restaurant, in a city, or you take a very small hotel in a village, who will pollute more when you look at the environment. Environment wise, the small hotel in the village will pollute more because they will be doing their cooking, or the dhaba on the roadside, they will be cooking with the dry wood and with the timber, with the lumber they will be cooking. Means what? They will create more pollution. There will be a lot of pollution that they will leave into this environment. But a sophisticated firm or sophisticated restaurant might cook with gas or even electricity or other alternative renewable energy resources, and there may not be any pollution at all. After all, they may just release steam into the environment, which is not a problem. So the bigger firms might have additional advantage than the smaller firms, and then smaller firms will become probably lesser and lesser competitive due to the extra costs. Quite possible. That is another limitation of this cap and trade system. For that matter, any system that tries to control pollution through either pollution taxes or cap and trade system also, logically both are similar as far as limitations are concerned. And as we discussed earlier in the same case of pollution taxes, if the products are relatively inelastic demand, then they will not have any impact. Let us say diamonds and all. Diamonds prices increased, the demand will not reduce drastically. But diamonds polishing and all creates lot of environmental damage actually. But still, it's okay for the people who produce the diamonds also, who use and consume and buy the diamonds also and wear them also. They are okay with that. Even if the prices are increased, even if the government levies a huge pollution tax, or even if the government increases or tries to implement the cap and trade system, still it doesn't matter, doesn't make much difference to those people, because that product is having a relatively inelastic demand. So they will not have any impact. So the big firms will get advantage, smaller firms might not get advantage. The products with inelastic demand might not be really impacted by this system. In reality, after all this, is it really stopping pollution? We don't know. Maybe it is only just disincentivizing the pollution or incentivizing to generate less pollution. That's all it is doing. It is only creating an economic value to the pollution rather than stopping the pollution itself. These are the various aspects of externalities and negative externalities particularly, and to be very specific, pollution. How the government intervention should be there in those areas is a very important aspect. Direct intervention, direct controls, or even market-based approach. Market-based approaches have two things. Either there can be pollution taxes or cap and trade system. These are the ways government will try to intervene into the market to curb the negative externalities. Is it the only job of the government to curb the negative externalities? No. Definitely government also should encourage positive externalities. How the government will do that? Of course, it can do that with two types of approaches once again. What are the approaches to encourage positive externalities? One, it can give subsidies. Two, it can directly produce or render the goods or services. Government itself will render, means it is acting like a supplier. Or if it is not providing directly, at least it can give subsidies to those people who are generating those positive externalities. These are the two ways where the government can encourage positive externalities. Let us look at them one by one. First thing is subsidies. So how the subsidies are going to work and how they will encourage the positive externalities? Common sense. Definitely. What is a subsidy? It is the part which the government pays, a part of the cost to the firms in order to promote the production of goods having positive externalities. So like an example, as we have taken, e-vehicles. E-vehicles will get subsidy from the government. So is usage of e-vehicles going to have positive externality or not? Is it going to reduce the pollution or not? Yes. So definitely government is paying a part of the cost to the firms or even sometimes directly to the consumers also. So that is how the subsidies will encourage the positive externalities, by promoting the production of the goods having those positive externalities. And this is in fact a market-based policy, because it is not a direct intervention. Government is not providing directly, but it is giving subsidies. Who is manufacturing? Government is not manufacturing. Government is not using directly. It is only just facilitating the market to encourage the positive externalities generated by those goods or services. So it is a market-based policy, since the subsidies to producers would lower their cost of production. If producers are given subsidies, that will reduce their cost of production definitely. So what happens? That product will be available at a cheaper price, and that means that product will be consumed more and more. And why we want to encourage that product to be consumed more and more? Because it has positive externality. And subsidy on a good which has a substantial positive externalities would reduce its cost naturally, and consequently it will reduce the price. So if it reduces the price, naturally also what happens? The demand for that product will increase. That's what the government wants. That's what the government wants most of the people to use that. Practical example of that can be taken in the recent past. Very much encouragement given by the central government now for e-vehicles. The electric cars and electric two-wheelers are getting subsidies even from the consumer's point of view, and even the manufacturers of those vehicles also will get some subsidies from the government. From manufacturer's point of view, solar power or wind power or type of power manufacturing units which will get tremendous subsidies from the government. Why government is doing all that? Is it directly manufacturing power or solar power? No, it is not. But it is subsidizing the manufacturing process of solar power, wherein the total cost of that power will be reduced, and consequently the price of that product also is reduced. So these are the ways subsidies can encourage positive externalities. Is it the only way? No. There is another way also, where the government itself can be an entrepreneur. Can a government be an entrepreneur also? Pure capitalist economists will say, no, government should not be an entrepreneur. But it is not the way it works. As we discussed earlier, there is nothing called pure capitalism or pure market economy, and if it is really pure, then over a period of time it will become impure, and that will result in market failure. So naturally there will be a situation in relation to at least certain goods or services where the government is supposed to be an entrepreneur. It has to deliver some goods and services to the public. Means what? Directly it should provide certain goods to the public which will cause positive externalities, we can say. So in case of the products and services whose externalities are vastly positive and pervasive means throughout the economy, throughout the country, they are spread. Everywhere they can be felt. Then it is better that government enters the market directly as an entrepreneur to produce and provide them. This is what is ideal. It is all the countries are they following, all the governments are they following is a different discussion. But at least theoretically speaking, ideally speaking, where certain products having positive externalities which are very positive, then the externalities are pervasive, means they are going to be useful for the entire society, not just to one segment of the people, then it is always better that government enters the market directly. For example, fundamental research to protect the futuristic technology interest of the society is in most cases funded by the government. Fundamental research is funded by the government. In India we have CCMB, ICMR, like now recently, so many labs which will conduct fundamental research, not only in these areas of chemistry, biology and all, even in the area of agriculture also. We have agricultural research institutions which will create and try to invent new types of seeds and new types of crops and new types of breeds in the agriculture. So who is doing all that research? Who is funding all that research? Generally the private market will not fund that. The fundamental research is generally funded by government only, since the market may not be willing to provide them. Once again, this is only a scenario. It is a different story. Even in India we have separate institutions which will do fundamental research. We have Tata Institute of Fundamental Research which is a private institution, but still it does fundamental research. And in America also there are many universities, including the top universities like Harvard, etc. They have a lot of investment made in the fundamental research in the physics and chemistry and biology, and even something like biochemistry, molecular biology, etc., genetic engineering. So much of fundamental research keeps on happening throughout the world, but in general, once again, those projects are generally funded by the government. What incentive the market will have to fund them? Market will fund for product-based research. Okay, corona vaccine we want. Market will fund that. Lot of private companies are in the race to manufacture that vaccine now, as we can see. That is good for them because there is a market for it. Just to see what a virus is, or just to do some fundamental research on virology, maybe they are not interested. That government and government associations and organizations only will do in general. So that is where the government itself has to become an entrepreneur. It has to have establishment of certain institutions which will do such type of activities. Of course, the result of which will be very positive and pervasive. That is why we are calling them as positive externalities. And not only that, the government can engage in the direct production of environmental quality. This we see almost every time, Haritaharam and all in the state of Telangana. Afforestation, reforestation, protection of water bodies, Namami Gange project in India, which is there. Why government has to do Namami Gange? What is the reason? Because that is also job of the government. It should engage itself into the direct production of environmental quality. The treatment of sewage happening at municipality levels, cleaning of toxic waste sites. Who will do all these things? Definitely government can do. So government can be an entrepreneur. It can have its own facilities, its own organizations and institutions which will carry on these activities, which generate very widely spread positive externalities? If so, then government should not wait for somebody else to do, because markets will not do that. Markets will not do that. Government has to definitely jump and do itself. That is where the government should be, even an entrepreneur also. Lot of defense research happens, DRDO, etc. That is where the defense research happens in India. So many of the organizations in India, particularly if you see, are in the government sector, public sector, which are directly coming into the government purview, where those are all involved in the fundamental research related to various fields. And the government is also involved in the direct production of environmental quality. These are all the things government does. And even sometimes artificial rains and artificial clouds are created by the government when the rains were not coming on time, where the farmers are all waiting for the rains, and if the rains are, the monsoon was not arriving at the correct time, there were some years where artificial clouds were created, and government has funded such type of situations where they created almost artificial rains, and this happens in India. Not every year, but whenever such kind of rain deficit is there, a lot of state governments spend money on creating such kind of artificial clouds and rains. And why is it doing that? That is the job of the government. It has to jump in whenever there is a positive externality that can be generated by providing any goods or services. If so, government should become even an entrepreneur also. These are the various areas of government's intervention into the market, particularly related to two areas which we discussed. One is market power, which was a smaller one as usual, and the biggest one is externalities. Government should discourage negative externalities with its own mechanisms, rules, regulations, direct and indirect ways of curbing the negative externalities, and it should encourage positive externalities also in its own way. Again, directly sometimes, indirectly sometimes. How the government will intervene into the market in these two possible areas of market failures we have looked at in the current session, and in the next session we'll continue this discussion about the other two major reasons for market failure, which are public goods and the other one is information failure. How the government will tackle the issue of lesser provision of public goods in the form of encouraging merit goods and discouraging demerit goods, and providing public goods by itself if it requires. All these things we'll discuss in the next session. Also, the government's intervention to prevent information failure also we'll discuss in the next session, and to conclude how the government will intervene and how the government will have to act finally to ensure the overall welfare of the society. Equitable distribution is the ultimate objective of any civilized society, and how the government will ensure that. All these aspects we'll discuss in the next session. Till then, take care. Bye bye. Thank you very much.